Growing up, I lived in a cozy, rented apartment that brimmed with love, largely thanks to my father, Levi. His smile could light up any room, and he had a knack for turning ordinary days into cherished adventures. Even our small balcony was transformed into a magical garden, and our living room could become a grand fort during the rainy weekends. I'm Grace, and those early years of my life were wonderfully simple and joyful. My mom, Sophie, was the quieter one, often lost in thoughts of a more luxurious life and a spacious house. Despite their contrasting dreams, my parents complemented each other well, creating a balanced home where I felt secure and loved. On many weekends, I would stay with my grandpa Ethan. He lived in a large, old Victorian house that seemed like a castle to my young eyes, with its creaking floors and mysterious nooks. These visits were special not just because I loved the house, but because they allowed my mom and dad some time alone, something Grandpa Ethan pointed out with a smile. Grandpa was wise and warm. He had been a bank manager before retirement, and he taught me valuable lessons about money management and life. Over pancakes that he claimed were the best in the world, he once shared that, though my mom dreamt of living in a grand house like his, what truly mattered was having a home filled with love. I understood even then, feeling lucky to have such warmth in our little apartment. Our life took an unexpected turn when I was 14. My dad began to lose weight rapidly. He tried to brush it off with jokes about getting fit, but his eyes betrayed his true concern. The frequent doctor visits and my mom's growing anxiety painted a grim picture. Despite his reassurances, the reality was harsh. My vibrant, energetic dad was succumbing to aggressive pancreatic cancer. In the months that followed, I watched my father diminish to a mere shadow of his former self. The disease was relentless. During his last days in the hospital, he could barely hold my hand, but he made me promise to look after Mom and to let Grandpa guide me, trusting his wisdom over anyone else's. The year after my dad passed away was like moving through a fog. Mom sank into a deep depression, barely able to interact with me, perhaps because I reminded her so much of him. Thankfully, Grandpa Ethan stood by me, becoming both a guardian and a sturdy anchor in the turbulent storm our lives had become. Eventually, living with Grandpa didn't just feel like a temporary arrangement. It became my new reality. I moved into what had been my dad's old room, surrounded by his childhood memorabilia. Grandpa helped me keep up with school, supported me through my grief, and tried his best to mend the gap left by both of my parents, one gone and the other lost to sorrow. Mom still called sometimes, her voice a whisper of her former self, reminding me of the vibrant life we once shared. But with each day at Grandpa's side, I learned to navigate my new life, carrying forward the lessons of love, resilience, and hope that my father and grandfather had instilled in me. My mother's voice had grown distant over time, her visits fleeting and filled with hurried glances that barely met mine. I had learned to expect little, but one sunny Saturday morning, a year and 3 months after Dad's passing, everything took an unexpected turn. Mom appeared at Grandpa Ethan's doorstep, her sorrowful widow's attire replaced by a bright yellow dress and a fresh, lively haircut. Her presence was almost unrecognizable as she excitedly declared, "Grace, sweetie, pack your things. You're coming home with me today." She bounced with an energy that reminded me of a carefree teenager. Both Grandpa and I were taken aback by her sudden transformation. The car ride back to our old apartment was filled with Mom's lighthearted banter, covering every trivial topic under the sun. It felt surreal, like I was next to a stranger who just happened to look like the mother I remembered. The biggest shock awaited at our apartment. Standing awkwardly in our living room were a tall man and a young girl, about 4 years my junior. "Grace, meet James and his daughter Hannah. James is my fiancé, and Hannah will be your new sister. We're getting married soon," Mom announced with a beaming smile as she clung to James's arm. The room seemed to spin around me. "When did all this happen?" I managed to ask, dazed. "Oh, we've been seeing each other for a while," Mom replied nonchalantly, waving off the importance of secrecy. "I didn't tell anyone because, people can be so jealous and judgmental. It was better this way." I retreated to my room, which I discovered had been redecorated without my knowledge. Shaking, I dialed Grandpa's number, who picked up immediately. "Grandpa, Mom has a fiancé. She's getting married and didn't tell anyone. There's a man here and his daughter," I whispered into the phone, my voice a mix of disbelief and hurt. Within 15 minutes, Grandpa was at our door. From my room, I could hear their conversation. "Sophie, how could you do this without telling anyone, without even telling your daughter?" Grandpa confronted her. "I'm happy for the first time in forever," Mom retorted defensively. "I've decided to start fresh, to live again. Levi would have wanted that. He wouldn't want me to waste away in depression." There was a heavy pause before Grandpa spoke again, his voice laden with resignation. "I hope you'll be happy, Sophie. Just don't forget you have a daughter who needs you, too." The 4 months leading up to the wedding felt like I was caught in a bizarre, alternate reality. Our small apartment now felt more cramped with 5 people. The hardest part was witnessing how quickly Hannah, my soon-to-be stepsister, became the center of Mom's world. "Mom, can you help me with my hair?" Hannah would ask, and Mom would immediately leap to assist, abandoning our conversations. Hannah calling her mom made my skin crawl. She had only known her for a few months, yet she received all the attention and privileges I had longed for but never received. When Hannah expressed interest in ballet, Mom didn't hesitate to enroll her in private lessons, a stark contrast to the years I'd been told we couldn't afford them for me. Any complaint from Hannah about her old phone being too slow was quickly remedied with a new iPhone. Whenever I tried to address the obvious favoritism, Mom would simply say, "Your sister needs to feel welcome here," ignoring the growing disparity between her treatment of us. Each time, it stung a little more, and each time, I corrected her silently. "Stepsister." Feeling overlooked was becoming all too familiar, and any attempts I made to express my need for belonging were met with indifference from my mother. She would simply shake her head and walk away, leaving me to grapple with the growing distance between us. The wedding day was a modest affair held at a local venue, yet it sparkled with my mother's joy. Dressed as a bridesmaid, I watched from the sidelines as she doted on Hannah, perfecting her hair and makeup, while I lingered in the background, barely noticing. Throughout the ceremony and reception, my mom clung to Hannah, proudly introducing her to guests as her beautiful daughter. I felt more like part of the staff than a member of the family. The generous wedding gift from Grandpa, a check for $6,000, should have been a highlight, but even this sparked a tense moment. I overheard a confrontation by the restrooms where my mom, slightly flushed from champagne and visibly upset, reproached Grandpa. "Really, Dad? A check," she hissed. "I was counting on you giving us your house. We're a proper family now. We need the space. That apartment is too small for 5 people." Grandpa's calm demeanor hid his disappointment. "Sophie, you're rushing things, first the sudden engagement and now this. That house isn't just a piece of property to be handed over on a whim. Besides, it's where Grace spends half her time now." "Oh, so you're playing favorites now?" Mom retorted. "No, I'm being practical, and maybe you should be, too," Grandpa replied. I slipped away before they noticed me, but the conversation haunted me. My mother had transformed, becoming a stranger, prioritizing her new, perfect family, with Hannah as the star and James as the ideal husband. It felt like there was no room left for me. In response, I withdrew further, spending more and more time at Grandpa's house. At least there, I didn't have to pretend to be happy about feeling replaced. As time passed and I approached high school graduation, the apartment became a place of silent endurance, where I learned to be invisible, to take up as little space as possible, spending my time either secluded in my room or at Grandpa's. During one of our strained family dinners, I mustered the courage to share my future plans. "I've been accepted to State University," I announced, trying to keep my voice steady. "I want to study finance and business management." The ensuing silence was suffocating. Mom put down her fork, exchanged a look with James, and then cleared her throat. "Actually, Grace, I think it would be better if you started working after graduation. College isn't necessary for everyone." Bewildered, I responded, "What are you talking about? Dad set up a college fund for me before he died. He always wanted me to get a higher education. Mom shifted uncomfortably, then admitted, about that fund. James and I have been discussing it, and we think it would be better to save that money for Hannah's education. She's incredibly talented, top of her class and everything. She'll need a good university education to reach her full potential. James added, nodding, Hannah has shown remarkable aptitude in her studies. It would be the right thing to do. Feeling as though I had been punched in the stomach, I realized that even the last gift my father had left for me was being redirected. My future, once supported by both of my parents, now seemed to hinge on the whims and preferences of a family I no longer recognized. That money is mine, I declared, my voice trembling with anger. Dad left it specifically for my education. You can't just redirect it to Hannah. My mom's eyes brimmed with tears. Don't be selfish, Grace. Hannah is your sister, she pleaded. Stepsister, I corrected sharply, standing so quickly that my chair toppled over. And that money is the last thing I have from Dad. You've already given her everything. My room, your attention, your love. But you can't have this. I won't let you. How dare you? Mom cried out, tears now streaming down her face. Yet, I could see through the emotional facade of the manipulation beneath. After everything we've done for you, Hannah needs this. Hannah needs? What about what I need? What about what Dad wanted for me? The confrontation ended with doors slamming and tears, mostly from Mom, who lamented my selfishness to anyone who would listen. Following that explosive night, the apartment's atmosphere turned even colder. No one spoke to me unless absolutely necessary. Hannah would smirk smugly as she passed me in the hallway, and James avoided eye contact altogether. When my graduation day arrived, only Grandpa was there in the audience. He cheered loud enough for 5, and his proud, beaming smile was all the recognition I needed. That evening, I packed up my life into 3 cardboard boxes and an old suitcase. Grandpa helped me load everything into his car. Your room is always ready for you, sweetheart, he reassured me as we drove away from the apartment, a place that had ceased to feel like home long ago. I didn't look back.
College was my sanctuary.
I immersed myself in my studies, fueled by a desire to make both my father and Grandpa proud. The business and finance courses were thrilling, and I excelled, always eager to share my achievements with Grandpa. Tell me again about derivatives, he'd request over the phone, his voice always eager and proud, even though he knew more about finance than most of my professors. But as the years went by, I noticed subtle changes in him. His voice grew tired more quickly, and his sharp wit sometimes faltered. On visits, I'd catch him wincing in pain or rubbing his chest when he thought I wasn't looking. It's just age catching up with me, he'd dismiss, but my concern only deepened. I began calling him twice daily and drove home every weekend possible, not just on holidays. We'd spend hours in his kitchen, sipping tea and chatting about everything and nothing, just as we used to. Sometimes, he'd look at me with such profound love and pride that it tightened my throat. It was during my final semester when the call came, I almost didn't answer it. Grandpa died last night, Mom said, her voice emotionless. The news dropped like a stone in my stomach, and I collapsed, overcome with grief. The funeral was set for Thursday at 3 p.m. at the Hartford Funeral Home, a place as understated and dignified as Grandpa himself. I arrived early, dressed in black, feeling every fabric against my skin as a stark reminder of his absence. As I braced myself to face Mom and her new family, the weight of my loss bore down on me, and the emptiness was overwhelming. Grandpa wasn't there to see me through this, to offer a comforting word or a reassuring hug, and that realization was the hardest part of all. They weren't there when I arrived at the funeral. Instead, Mr. Thomas, one of Grandpa's old friends from his banking days, was managing everything. They're running a bit late, he informed me after I inquired about my mother's whereabouts. She called to say they'd be delayed. The service itself was a beautiful tribute to Grandpa, filled with heartfelt stories from those who knew him best, recollections of his kindness, integrity, and humor. Alone, I sat in the front row, engulfed by my grief, until the back door creaked open midway through the service. Mom entered, flanked by James and Hannah, all dressed in meticulously coordinated black outfits. They quietly took seats at the very back of the room. Mom didn't even look my way, her face a mask of solemnity that didn't quite reach her darting eyes, which seemed to be sizing up the room rather than mourning. I turned away, feeling a mix of grief and anger, tears stinging my eyes. Even here, at her father's funeral, she couldn't acknowledge me or set aside her grievances for just one day. After the service, I drove to what had been Grandpa's house and my home for the past 3 years. But the sight that greeted me stopped me cold. Garbage bags filled with my belongings were scattered across the front lawn as if they were trash. Some had burst open, spilling my clothes, books, and photo albums onto the grass. My hands shook as I tried my key in the front door, only to find that the locks had been changed. As I stood there, bewildered and key still in hand, the door swung open. Mom stood in the doorway, her funeral attire unchanged, but her expression now one of triumph. "Oh, good. You're here to collect your things," she said as if she were doing me a favor. "This is my house now. Dad's finally gone, and as his only child, I'm the rightful heir. I've already had the locks changed. We're moving in tonight." I stared at her, unable to comprehend the depth of her callousness. "You couldn't even wait until after the funeral? These are my things, my home." "No, this is my home now," she interrupted sharply. "And you better take your stuff quickly, or it's going in the dumpster. I need to clear the space for Hannah's things." Her smile was cold and dismissive. "She's getting your old room. She's always wanted a bigger bedroom." Numb. I began to gather my scattered belongings, stuffing everything back into the torn bags. I tried to collect the photos of Dad and Grandpa from the grass, while Mom watched from the doorway like a hawk, ensuring I took nothing else. The drive back to my college dorm was a haze of tears and disbelief. My roommate helped me carry everything upstairs, wisely choosing not to ask questions when she saw the state I was in. A week later, I received a phone call from a law firm. "Miss Johnson, this is Mr. Logan from Logan and Partners Law Firm. I'm your grandfather's notary. We need you to come in for the reading of his will. Would Thursday at 9 a.m. work for you?" I agreed, although I couldn't see the point. Mom had made it abundantly clear that she considered herself the heir to everything. When I arrived at the notary's office that Thursday, Mom, James, and Hannah were already there, settled into plush leather chairs like royalty. Hannah was absent-mindedly examining her manicure, while James scrolled through his phone. Mom's eyes narrowed as I entered, her gaze sharp and calculating. When she spotted me entering the room, my mother's face twisted with confusion and annoyance. "What are you doing here?" she demanded loudly, ensuring everyone in the office could hear. "You're clearly not needed for this. We're handling family business." Mr. Logan, the notary, adjusted his glasses and began to read from the document he had in front of him. "I, Ethan Levi Mitchell, being of sound mind and body, declare this to be my last will and testament," he began in a formal tone. My mother already wore a smug, triumphant smile, but it quickly vanished as Mr. Logan continued. "To my beloved granddaughter, Grace Johnson, I leave my house, along with all its contents and my entire savings account, containing $650,000. The room fell into a stunned silence. My mother's disbelief shattered it moments later.
"What?"
"This can't be right," she exclaimed, snatching the document from Mr. Logan's hands, her eyes frantically searching the text. "Where's my part? I'm his daughter." Mr. Logan calmly retrieved the will from her grasp. "Mrs. Waters, your father's wishes are quite clear. He leaves everything to Miss Grace Johnson. There is no provision for you in the will." "This is impossible." My mother's face flushed a deep red. "She manipulated him. She poisoned him against me. I'll sue. I'll contest this will." "The will is ironclad," Mr. Logan stated firmly. "Your father had it properly witnessed and notarized 8 months ago. He was of completely sound mind, as attested by his doctor. Any attempt to contest it would be futile and expensive." Suddenly, my mother's strategy shifted from rage to sorrow as she turned her tear-filled eyes to me. Grace, sweetie, please, she pleaded, her voice dripping with a false sweetness. We've already given up our apartment. We moved everything out yesterday. We have nowhere to go. You can't just throw us out on the street. We're family. I stood, holding the folder Mr. Logan had just handed me. Inside were the deed to the house, ownership transfer documents, and all the legal paperwork confirming my ownership of the property. Family? I asked quietly. Like how you threw my belongings onto the lawn before Grandpa was even in his grave. Like how you tried to steal my college fund. Like how you've treated me for the past 3 years. That was different. She started, but I cut her off. This is your problem, not mine. I turned to leave. I suggest you start looking for a new apartment. I drove straight to Grandpa's house, my house now. Unable to get in, I called a locksmith. When he arrived, I showed him my freshly notarized ownership documents. I'm the legal owner of this house, I explained, asking him to open the locks and then change them. I want to be the only one with the keys. As the locksmith worked, I packed up everything that belonged to Mom, James, and Hannah. Their clothes, toiletries, even the posters Hannah had already stuck to my old bedroom wall. I stuffed it all into garbage bags, just as they had done with my belongings. When the locksmith finished and handed me the new keys, I placed all their bags neatly on the front porch. As the sun began to set, I heard the familiar sound of my mother's car pulling into the driveway. From the living room window, Grandpa's favorite spot, I watched as they discovered their belongings outside, mirroring the treatment I had endured. My mother's outraged shriek, "What is this?" "All our things are outside," echoed, but this time I was prepared and resolute, watching the scene unfold with a sense of finality. I stood resolutely in the entryway as they approached, the scene charged with tension. My mother's face was a canvas of anger, James's expression soured as if he'd bitten into a bitter fruit, and Hannah's tears flowed freely, melodramatically punctuating the air. "How dare you?" My mother charged up the porch steps, her voice sharp. "We live here now. You can't just throw us out." "Actually, I can," I replied calmly, the ownership papers in hand. "This house legally belongs to me now. You'll need to collect your things and leave." "We have nowhere else to go," Hannah sobbed. "That was something to consider before you decided to leave your apartment," I responded without emotion. "It's not my responsibility." My mother tried to brush past me into the house, but I blocked her way. "Move, Grace. This is absurd. It's your father's house. It was his. Now it's mine. If you don't leave now with your belongings, I'll call the police for trespassing," I stated firmly, phone in hand, ready to dial. "The choice is yours, just as it was when you decided what to do with my belongings not so long ago," I reminded her of her recent actions. The air thickened with their curses and threats as they reluctantly packed their bags. Between her bouts of tears and fits of rage, my mother lamented the unfairness of it all, while Hannah repeatedly claimed I would regret my decision. James muttered about challenging the will as they stuffed their car with the last of their possessions. As they were about to leave, my mother turned sharply, her parting words stinging the cool air. "You're no daughter of mine. Your father would be ashamed." I mustered a sad smile.
"No, Mom.
Dad would be proud that I finally stood up for myself."
Goodbye."
I watched as their car faded into the distance, rounding the bend and out of my life. That was 8 months ago. Now, in my final semester, poised to graduate with honors, the house is leased to a delightful young family. Their rent is nurturing my savings, fulfilling my grandfather's wishes. I discovered his letter the night they all left, tucked away in the study safe. "My dearest Grace," it began, revealing his foresight into my mother's predictable reaction to his will. He apologized for the ordeal but expressed his confidence in my integrity and acumen. "The house is yours to manage as you see fit. Just one request, keep the family photos in the attic. Some memories, even the painful ones, are worth holding on to." I've honored his request, along with other promises I made to him and my father. Now I'm focused on forging ahead, embracing the future while retaining the lessons of the past. Family isn't just about blood relations. It's about those who stand by you and nurture your growth. As for my mother, James, and Hannah, They eventually found a new place in the city. They've reached out a few times, typically in need, but I've chosen not to respond. Some chapters are better concluded, left firmly in the past as I build my future.